Welcome to Saints of Silence. Today, we are going to immerse ourselves in the most intimate, sacred, and sorrowful moment in the history of humanity. Imagine being present in the very room where Jesus of Nazareth, knowing perfectly well that he would be betrayed and tortured that same night, shares his last meal with those he loved most. But what you are going to hear today are not just the gospel accounts you already know by heart. They are the extraordinary, intimate, and chilling details that the blessed mystic Anne Catherine Emmerich saw with her own eyes during her profound, divine ecstasies. Today, you will discover exactly what that upper room looked like. You will feel the aroma that lingered in the air. You will see the exact expressions on the face of each apostle, and you will witness the incomprehensible miracle of the first Eucharist, second by second. Close your eyes, prepare your heart, and listen.
I saw. I was there, transported in spirit to that blessed Holy Thursday in the ancient city of Jerusalem. It was the 14th day of the month of Nisan, and the streets were seething with the preparations for the Jewish Passover. But my spirit was taken far from the noise to a specific house near the temple. There, on the upper floor, was a large room that would change the destiny of humanity for all eternity. The room was spacious and rectangular. Its walls of pale limestone softly reflected the golden, flickering light of the oil lamps. The ceiling was supported by sturdy beams of cedar wood, and the floor was covered with vividly colored oriental rugs, deep reds, blues, and golds, creating an atmosphere that was welcoming and at the same time profoundly solemn. Through the small windows, I could see the sky gradually darkening over the holy city. Night was approaching. In the center of the room, there was a low table. Around it lay cushions where the guests would recline to eat, according to the custom of the time. The aroma in the air was unmistakable. The sacred incense mingled with the scent of strong spices and the smell of roasted lamb rising from the lower kitchen. On the table, I saw the unleavened bread hidden beneath an immaculate white cloth, heavy clay jugs filled with red wine, and small plates with bitter herbs. Jesus arrived at the room first, accompanied by John, his beloved disciple. I was able to contemplate his sacred face with a clarity that, even to this day, makes me weep. There was a divine serenity in him, but also a human sorrow so crushing that it touched the very depths of the soul. His eyes, those eyes that had gazed upon the face of God the Father from all eternity, reflected an absolute knowledge of the torture he would suffer in the coming hours. He already knew of Judas's betrayal. He knew of Peter's denial. He felt on his own skin the lashes, the crown of thorns that would pierce his skull, and the rough wood of the cross waiting for him at Calvary. And yet, there was a silent determination in his expression, as if he were saying without words, "The hour for which I came into the world has arrived." I watched as Jesus walked slowly around the room, touching the objects. His hands, Those same hands that molded the first man from clay, that parted the waters of the Red Sea, that raised Lazarus from the tomb, delicately caressed the bread and the cups, as if they already anticipated the terrifying and glorious miracle that would shortly take place there. The other apostles began to arrive, one by one. Peter entered with his characteristic energy, speaking loudly and gesturing, always expansive. Matthew, the former tax collector, entered observing every corner with his calculating mind, now transformed into an attentive heart. Thomas arrived asking questions, wanting to understand why this supper felt so different. And then Judas Iscariot arrived. Oh, what a terrible moment! He arrived last, and even before physically seeing him cross the doorway, I felt a gloomy, cold, and suffocating presence enter with him. A spiritual darkness enveloped his figure like a dense cloud. His eyes, which had once shone with the joy of following the Messiah, were now cloudy, evasive, and filled with panic. Two opposing forces were tearing his soul apart from the inside. But what broke my heart the most was how Jesus received him. There was no coldness, there was no contempt. The Master looked at him with infinite compassion. His gaze seemed to scream to him, "My son, there is still time. You can still return to me." It was a love so utterly pure that, for the briefest of instants, I saw tears form in the traitor's eyes. But the darkness that possessed him forced him to look away, unable to bear the light of God. When everyone was gathered, Jesus did something that left the men breathless. He stood up, removed his outer garment, and tied a towel around his waist. He filled a bronze basin with clean water. The Creator of the universe knelt down. He knelt in the dust before Peter to wash his feet. All of creation seemed to hold its breath at that supreme humiliation. I saw Peter weep, resist, and finally surrender to the invincible tenderness of his God. One by one, he washed the feet of the apostles. But when Judas's turn came, my soul trembled. Jesus held the feet of the traitor with even more love and delicacy than the others. His sacred hands caressed and washed the very feet that in a few hours would run into the darkness to sell him to his executioners. Jesus looked him in the eyes from the floor. Judas shuddered. I saw his entire body convulse. Everything could have changed in that exact second, but Judas's heart hardened like a black stone, and the washing of the feet ended in a silence that foreshadowed death. After the washing, everyone settled back around the table, but the atmosphere was no longer the same. Something immense, irreversible had begun. I felt that the entire heaven was leaning over that room, while the darkness waited outside, holding back its fury. The apostles tried to follow the normal rhythm of the Passover meal, but there was restlessness in their movements. Peter spoke at times, trying to break the tension. John remained very close to Jesus, absorbing his every gesture with an open heart. Thomas watched with a slightly furrowed brow, as if he sensed that the Master was leading them toward a mystery too high for human reason. On the table rested the unleavened bread, the cups, the dark red wine, the bitter herbs, and the paschal lamb. Everything followed the ancient order of Israel. Everything obeyed the memory of Egypt, of the liberation, of the blood on the doors. But I saw clearly that Jesus was about to take that supper far beyond memory. He was going to forge, in the middle of that night, an eternal covenant. His face was withdrawn in silent prayer. It was not the silence of exhaustion. It was the silence of one who is offering his life in advance. I saw in him a majesty so serene, so achingly beautiful, that my soul trembled. I knew I was looking at the Lamb before the slaughter. Then I saw him take the bread in his hands. Oh, those sacred hands. They were the hands of a humble worker, hands that had blessed children, touched the sick, raised the dead. But in that instant, those hands held more than just bread. They held the door to a mystery that would sustain the church until the end of the world. Jesus raised his eyes to heaven. Everything in the room became motionless. I did not hear just a ritual blessing. I perceived a total surrender, a perfect offering, an obedience that rose to the Father like the purest perfume. And then a supernatural clarity began to radiate from his chest. It was not a light coming from the lamps. It was a living, interior, divine light. That light enveloped the bread he held, as if heaven itself were descending to seal what his lips were about to pronounce. When he spoke the sacred words, I did not see a symbol. I did not see a poetic image. I saw a tremendous, sacred, and absolute reality. Under the humble appearance of bread was truly his body, the same body born of the Virgin, the same body that would be wounded, spat upon, nailed, and surrendered. Everything was there, hidden and glorious at the same time. Around the table, I saw multitudes of angels bowing in adoration. They were not few. They were countless, silent, burning with reverence. It seemed that every celestial hierarchy had been summoned to witness the birth of the most sublime sacrament. The air itself became denser, purer, more terrifyingly sacred. The apostles received that consecrated bread with varying degrees of understanding, but all were struck by a force that surpassed them. John received it as one who abandons himself completely to love. Peter trembled, moved by a devotion that almost disarmed him. Matthew welcomed it with the seriousness of someone who understands that history has just been divided forever. Even those who understood less felt that something infinitely holy had just happened. But when it was Judas's turn, everything inside me shrank in horror. Jesus offered his body to him as well, to him too, with a tenderness I cannot describe,
the Lord extended the sacred gift to the man who had already sold his heart to the darkness. In that gaze, I saw a final call, a final plea, a love that would not retreat even in the face of treachery. Judas received it, and yet he did not receive it like the others. The light did not penetrate his soul in the same way. It was rejected, resisted, oppressed by a darkness that had already seized the deepest corners of his heart. I saw that the holiest gift became for him not consolation, but judgment. Then Jesus took the chalice. He held it in his hands with an even greater gravity. His eyes filled with tears, not tears of weakness, but of a love so immense for lost humanity that my whole being was wounded just looking at it. When he pronounced the words over the wine, I contemplated the same miracle, even more thrilling. Under the appearance of wine was truly his most precious blood. I saw in that chalice the blood of Gethsemane, the blood of the scourging, the blood of the crowning with thorns, the blood poured out on the cross. Everything was mysteriously present. The entire future passion had leaned over that table. Redemption was already beginning to be handed over in the form of food. The love of God became a drink for human misery. It was then that the atmosphere suddenly changed. The sacred sweetness was pierced by a sorrowful sentence. Jesus announced that one of those present would betray him. The entire room seemed to sink into a deadly silence. The lamps kept burning, but it was as if a shadow had passed over the table. I saw the apostles look at each other in bewilderment. One by one, they began to examine themselves, not only with fear of the other, but with fear of themselves. That is the power of holiness. When Christ speaks, even the innocent suspects his own fragility. Their voices trembled as they asked if it was them. None felt secure before the purity of the Master.
But Judas also asked, and he did so with a coldness that froze the air. His voice tried to sound serene, but I saw the abyss opening beneath him. Jesus looked at him with a sadness that did not come from weakness, but from rejected love. In that quiet, terrible answer, I understood that the traitor had reached the edge of a definitive decision. And then I witnessed one of the most horrifying moments of the entire vision. When Judas received the morsel offered by Jesus, I saw a hellish presence lunge at him with violence. It was not a metaphor. It was not a simple feeling of malice. I saw an eruption of darkness over a will that was barely fighting anymore. The face of Judas hardened, his interior closed, and I felt that a terrible door had just been locked from the inside. There was an unfathomable compassion in Jesus in that instant. Not even then did he stop loving him. Not even then did he withdraw his merciful gaze. But the heart of the traitor had yielded to the night. I saw Judas stand up, with tense, almost strange movements, as if he no longer inhabited the same peace that reigned around the Master.
And when he left, I felt that the Passion officially entered its hour. After his departure, the room breathed in a different way. It was as if a sinister burden had left the premises, leaving the 11 inside an even more sacred and sorrowful intimacy. Then Jesus spoke at length, not with the tone of any ordinary teacher, but with the tenderness of one who gives his final confidences before suffering. He spoke of love. He spoke of the need to remain united with him. He spoke of the persecutions that would come, of the hatred of the world, of the sorrow that would soon scatter them. But he also spoke of consolation, of eternal dwellings, of a peace that the world cannot give nor take away. Every sentence fell upon the apostles like oil and fire at the same time. Peter promised fidelity unto death. I saw that he meant it sincerely. He truly loved him. But I also saw that he did not fully know himself. Jesus listened to him with a tenderness mixed with sorrow, like a father who already knows his son's fall, and even so has already prepared the way back. In his words to Peter, there was no humiliation, but anticipated mercy. Later, the Lord raised his soul to the Father in a prayer that filled the room with an almost unbearable reverence. There I understood that he did not pray only for the men at the table. He prayed for future believers, for those who would be born centuries later, for those who would seek him in the consecrated bread, for the wounded, tepid, persecuted, faithful, and weak souls. I understood with a shudder that has never left me that he was also praying for us. The night was advancing. Jesus finally rose from that table where he had left his heart hidden forever. He looked at the room one last time, the table, the disciples, the lamps, the shadows on the walls, and I felt that his gaze embraced at the same time the cenacle, Gethsemane, Calvary, and all the altars of the future world. Then they went out, and I knew that the supper had ended, but the sacrifice had already begun. The body surrendered at the table would be torn on the cross. The blood offered in the chalice would soon run across the earth. What I had contemplated was not just a farewell. It was the birth of the eternal food and the visible beginning of redemption.
This was the Last Supper, seen through the mystical eyes of Anne Catherine Emmerich. A night of divine intimacy, of measureless love and absolute surrender, in which Christ instituted the most sublime sacrament of the Church. But it was also the night when betrayal became irreversible, the night when a heart called by the Master chose to lose itself in the darkness, and the night when the Passion began to unfold silently before heaven and earth. It was the night when the Son of God became true food for our souls, and also the night that laid bare how far a human freedom can fall when it rejects love. At that holy table were born the Eucharist, the new covenant, and the consolation of the Church for all centuries. Stay with us here at Saints of Silence
to continue contemplating the deepest mysteries of our faith through the visions of the saints. Remain in the peace of Christ, and see you soon.